It's okay, we're very casual for the MAEP talk, so please take your time, make yourself comfortable. My name is Nicole Sukup, and I am the supervisor of the Minnesota Artist Exhibition Program, or MAEP. And it is my honor today to introduce our speakers, Andy Sturdevant, who will be in conversation with our MAEP artist, Nik Nerburn. Today's conversation is part of Nik's exhibition on view in US Bank Gallery, The Milkman, which will be on view through June 21st. So before I get started, thank you all for venturing down. I know it's May Day, it's 30 degrees warmer than normally is this time of year. I think it snowed last year when we did this in May, but I appreciate you all making the trek through MIA and to join us here. So the flow for today, I'm gonna share a little bit, do the intros, and then we'll invite Nik and Andy on stage to be in conversation. The conversation will last about 45 minutes, and then we invite you to come to the US Bank Gallery just down the hall to your left to come see The Milkman with fresh perspective, or if you're not able to join us before June 21st, or if you haven't seen it at all yet. So without further ado, I oversee the Minnesota Arts Exhibition Program. It is a 50-year-old program which was founded as a partnership between the museum and regional artists. The MAEP reflects a unique, ongoing relationship that has spawned thousands of artists' careers and redefined what museums are today. MIA engages regional artists through a range of opportunities, including workshops, programs, and the MAEP. The MAEP is juried by 5 Minnesota regional artists, and artists who are selected to participate in an exhibition receive $13,500 for the opportunity to do so. It is one of the most unique programs in the country, not only for its financial support, but for the opportunity to engage with approximately 20,000 visitors per exhibition. All of MIA's initiatives are designed to support artists across all career stages. Drawing upon 5 decades of experience, we continue to evolve, providing a responsive platform that meets the needs of Minnesota's diverse artist communities now and into the future. We just recently launched the MAEP quarterly newsletter, where you can learn about all of our opportunities here at MIA and throughout the region. If you're interested, I encourage you to go to our website for more information on how to join. So, today's talk and Nik's exhibition was generously supported by RBC Wealth Management. Thank you to RBC Wealth Management for your continued support. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Andy and Nik, and then I'll ask them to take the stage, and I'll hand it off to them. Andy Sturdevant is a regular old Renaissance man, to say the least. He is a writer, an artist, a designer living in Minneapolis. He is the author of 4 full-length nonfiction books, including the Minnesota Book Award-nominated Closing Time, Saloons, Taverns, Dives, and Watering Holes of the Twin Cities with Bill Lindecki. Yep. Andy has written about art, history, and culture for a variety of Twin Cities-based publications, websites including Architecture Minnesota, MPLS St. Paul, MinPost, MAS Context, MNArtist.org, Metropolitan Regional Arts Counselor, Apology, The Smudge, The Growler, and others. Excuse me, he is a recipient of grants including the MRAC and Forecast Public Arts, and has received awards from Minnesota Media and Publishing Association, the Minnesota Professional Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and has worked as a writer in residence at the Lawrence McKinley Gould Library at Carleton College in Northfield, and the Northeast Library. Most recently, he is the founder and publisher of Birchwood Palace Industries, a small press dedicated to short-form nonfiction and reference works. Andy is also an MAEP alumni. His art practice includes installations, publications, performances, public events, all coexisting in one project from time to time. Beyond MIA, his work has been exhibited at the Northern Spark Festival, the Flatton Art Museum at St. Olaf College, as well as museums, galleries, and spaces in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, and elsewhere. He has organized, led, or participated in a variety of engaging and accessible multi-purpose public programs, including walking tours, panels, lectures, and other events. Andy is also the Artist Resource Director at Springboard for the Arts in St. Paul. Now for the man of the hour, Nik Nerburn. Nerburn's cross-disciplinary projects reflect his passion for people's histories and places that are off the map. He is the 24-25 Minneapolis College of Art and Design Jerome Foundation Fellow and has received support from the Minnesota State Arts Board, Art Place America, and Springboard for the Arts. And as I had mentioned, his current exhibition is on view through June 21st. And I will let these two, Andy and Nik, take the stage and tell you all about his work, his practice, and the exhibition. Andy and Nik.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is great. It's great to see everybody. Yeah, my name's Nik.
My name's Andy.
Yeah. The Milkman is on view in US Bank Gallery. I'll talk a little bit about how the project started. So I was really interested in this kind of set of family stories that took place in this neighborhood called Oak Lake Park, which is a now vanished neighborhood, kind of where the Minneapolis Farmers Market is now, and maybe the Walker Sculpture Garden. So I was really interested in like my family, my dad's side, they moved from the UP, rural UP, to Minneapolis in the 1920s. And this whole crazy chain of events happened and the family fell apart. Dad disappeared, mom died, and the kids were sent to these different orphanages around the Twin Cities. So I did everything I could to like learn every little detail about this project. And my background is in documentary, film and video and photography. So I kind of did the thing where you like go to the landscape and photograph it as it is now, you know, like you kind of try to piece together every piece of documentary evidence you can. And it just wasn't working. I started playing with these dollhouses in my studio as like maybe a stand-in or like a reference point for a house that doesn't exist anymore. I was like, well, let me kind of make the house if I can't find the actual one. And that's kind of when the Milkman started. The project was photography at first, grew into animation and video, and I sort of started hybridizing these different family stories. It was no longer about just my dad's side, but also a story from my mom's side of the family of my grandma having a kid with the Milkman. And so the stories started blending together in a way that kind of became, I don't know, hybridized or like fictional. And the film kind of went from there. So that's sort of the genesis of the project.
Yeah, and that's very much how it comes across. I think it's a very ambiguous piece, as you'll see. So, Nik and I did what everybody does before there's an MAEP artist talk. We went to the Cardinal Inn and we kind of sat down. In using some of the most advanced critical technology available to civilians at this time, we identified 4 major themes in the work. And so, when you come to these things, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's, it just kind of goes on and on and on. But we've got a pretty tight program here. We've got 4 areas. You can think of these as like 4 rooms, 4 pages, 4 acts, 4 episodes, really however you want to think about it. But that first is men and fatherhood. And of course, Nik is about to become a papa.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
And I myself am a papa. And, we all know that fathers are some of the most terrifying individuals imaginable. Whether they want to be or not. And actually, that's a great thing about becoming a father is you find the terror within yourself and you see yourself through your child's eyes and you're like, oh no, the cycle is continuing. But in a very nice, wholesome way. But yeah, I mean, definitely the presence of fathers was, very easy to spot in this. And I think there was one little clue, I guess, that Nik put in there, which is at some point you hear the hymn "Everlasting Arms" being whistled. That's the. And right there, of course, like if you see movies a lot, the first thing I thought of was like, oh, okay, it's a Night of the Hunter situation, right? Like Night of the Hunter, 1955 movie by Charles Laughton with Robert Mitchum, is about a predator that kind of uses the guise of fatherhood, and it's a movie kind of about fathers. And so I was thinking, okay, we're doing this is a rural Gothic story here. And so we've actually got a clip from Night of the Hunter that we can watch. That I think sets the mood a lot for what Nik is doing with the piece. Kind of connects it to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Shame on you, Ruby. Running around the house after that mad dog of a man.
Miss Williams.
Ruby, go get the children out of bed and bring them down here. Women are such germ fools. It's a hard world for little things.
So good. So the basic plot of Night of the Hunter is a man steals some money, and he is being chased by the police, and he buries it, and he tells his son where it is, and then he's taken off to jail. And so this son and his little sister Pearl now live with their mom by themselves, and he's keeping the secret about where the money's hidden. And along comes this preacher who the mom falls in love with, this kind of strange traveling preacher character who's very theatrical, and he speaks in this kind of over-the-top theatrical voice. And when he's alone with the kids, he turns to them and says, "Where's the money hidden? I know you know where it is." He's not a preacher at all. He was in jail with the father, heard the story, and got out and went to find the family. And so he's following the family, following and making the mother fall in love with him so that he can get to this money. And at this point in the movie, he has killed his wife, the mother of the kids, and is now the mask is off. He's full on predator mode, chasing these kids. And it's totally bizarre film. The director just made one film. It wasn't that well received when it came out. But it's so, you can get a sense of it. It's so powerful and impactful. And I guess it was an influence in this project, not directly, but I wanted the dad to whistle that tune when he goes out to get cigarettes. In The Milkman, there's a scene where the kid is in the bed and looking at the grain silos upside down on the wall, and someone goes by the door and you hear the song as he walks out. So to me, it's like the leitmotif of the dad.
Yeah, exactly. What to say about this? Yeah, the idea of the milkman is such a well-trodden euphemism. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, cliches sometimes turn out to be, true, because they're so real. But there's such a predatory quality to this. And Robert Mitchum plays the preacher. And, for a while when he's dating the mom, played by Shelley Winters, he's kind of like a stepdad, he's sort of a proxy dad to the kids. And, he's very, lugubrious and like charming, but, there's this real kind of threat and terror behind him, which I think is like, it goes a little bit with fatherhood. There's always this kind of fear. And I think that comes across really, well in the piece, because you only know the father through like his hugeness, there's like his scale that's so
his cryptic,
out of scale
stories.
With everything else. And he says like weird and terrifying things. And
right. And yet I don't see him as a bad guy in my mind. Like he's, the dad's the main character in my mind. That's sort of how I see it. He's the only one who you really see and hear through the text. But it is really about men, like the milkman. I think the piece is about men, not directly, but in my mind, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, exactly. And, when we'll get to the genealogy part later, because that kind of comes in at the end. But, when Nick and I were talking, we were thinking like, well, it's like one of the things you always hear from people that are roughly our generation, maybe a generation above. It's like, our family stories are kind of like the type that Nick is describing, like, they're sort of half whispered, sort of half understood, but not really understood. And there's a sense of like, we don't really know our family history. And I think part of the reason for that, like Nick and I were talking about this idea that I think comes from fundamentalist Christianity, but it's the idea of a bulwark generation, right? And so with a bulwark generation, you have the early and middle part of the 20th century, which is just this carnival of like violence and horror and desperation. You've got major wars. You've got people drank so much back then. There was just, as Grandpa Simpson once said, you didn't have to turn on the TV for violence. It was right out the back door. And I think this idea that with maybe the baby boom generation, that their fathers were so traumatized by everything they'd seen in the war and the Depression, and their fathers were so traumatized, and their fathers before them were so traumatized, and they were just, cycling this pattern of like abuse and violence forward. And it's the kind of the suburban or the post-war generation, the baby boom generation that says like, look, we're gonna get off the farm. We're gonna get out of the ancestral homeland, wherever that is. We're gonna kind of bury all this, and we're just gonna kind of wrap ourselves in consumerism and create this blank slate that you, our children, don't need to know about. Any of this stuff that came before, and in fact, it's better that you don't know about it.
Right, and so the film is really that era. Like I think of it as 30s and 40s, like right before that era you're talking about. And a big part of that is also the sound. So this is all pretty vintage sound effects banks that I work from. So mostly the BBC sound effects archive is where all the sounds come from. And I wanted that like very specific. There's a sound that comes with microphones from that era, the way footsteps sound on wood, like all of these sounds kind of paint a picture of that era to me.
Yeah, and there's kind of this oral wallpaper. There's like that coffee advertisement. Like, what are they talking about? They're talking about coffee and cigarettes and sex. And it's just a way of just like kind of grinding down the trauma of the past and being like, okay, we're just going to medicate with coffee and sex and cigarettes and, until we can't take it anymore. But yeah, there is that quality of the kind of the bulwark generation that you see in this. In a kind of a knowing way. I think one of my favorite details is the cow on the milkman. He's just like winking.
Yes.
It's just this very conspiratorial wink that's like, trust me, kid, you don't need to know all this stuff.
Yeah.
You're better off without knowing it.
Yeah, for me, the milkman actually appears in the film a few different times as different characters. Like maybe he's a shapeshifter or something. But back to the thing about scale, like the mix of scale in the film is really a type of puppetry. I think that's purely a puppetry move, right? Like characters changing shape, the hands being too big for the room. And I really like this tradition of puppetry saying things that we can't otherwise say, or the puppet can give a voice or a shape to something that you don't quite have words for yourself, maybe.
Where did some of the artifacts come from? Just because there are so many great artifacts in the piece that really do suggest that kind of mid-century, early 20th century setting.
Yeah, so I always work with secondhand dollhouses. So there's a lot of them out there, and they're very easy to source. And usually when you buy a dollhouse from someone, they give you like a shoebox full of bits and bobs that go with it. So most of them, it's kind of like, like Deborah Stratman, filmmaker, talks about thrift store filmmaking. She's like, I don't know what I want, but I know it when I see it. Yeah. And the houses and all of the pieces are sort of like that too. Like, I don't quite know what this house looked like, but in my mind's eye, it clearly exists.
Yeah, you don't know, and you have to figure out some narrative, which again is kind of what we're talking about with the generational thing. Well, that brings us to the second part.
Yes, town and country.
Town and country. And we've got another clip we'll watch here in a second, but should we just go ahead and watch it now?
Let's go right in.
Yeah, let's go right in. This is from a movie called The Big Lebowski from 1998.
Who are you working for? Lebowski? Jackie Treehorn?
The Knutsons.
Who the fuck are the Knutsons?
The Knutsons. It's a wandering daughter job. Bunny Lebowski, man. Her real name is Fawn Knutson. Her parents want her back, see?
Jesus fucking Christ.
Crazy, huh? Ran away about a year ago, and the Knutsons told me I should show her this when I found her. It's the family farm. It's outside of Moorhead, Minnesota. They think it'll make her homesick.
Oh, boy. How you gonna keep them down on the farm once they've seen Carl Hungus?
Thanks, Jeff. I wasn't literally thinking about this scene with the father whittling, talking about the ditch in Grigla, but it's kind of there, this type of photo that's supposed to be sentimental, but it doesn't make any sense. It's totally cryptic. It's like, this is not going to make me homesick.
We were actually both thinking of the same scene kind of amazingly, and Nick brought it up first. I was like, oh, I was thinking about that too. Because I think I'd be curious what kind of experience other folks had, but I go into the piece and I'm sitting in the dark, and already I'm kind of primed by Night of the Hunter, right? Night of the Hunter takes place in West Virginia, a very like classic Gothic rural kind of setting. And I'm kind of immersed in the world of the Milkman. I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is Gothic country dysfunction. I know this one. Yeah, I know this story. And so kind of I'm absorbing it as a rural tale, right? I know a little bit about Nick's background. I know that, Nick comes from a variety of great rural communities. So.
Yeah, I see the film as being in the city. Like, this is the first generation of the family coming from the country to the city. And this is the first time the families live together in a city. That's sort of how I see it. So it's interesting that you read it as rural.
Yeah, but the more time I spent with it, I realized, I think, that it was a kind of a wonderful inversion of that stereotype, right? The stereotype that, oh yeah, this is country dysfunction. And, again, the idea here is often that, the innocent people, the pure-hearted people of the country come into the city, and they're corrupted by its madness and its wickedness and its evil ways. In reality, we got a kind of a wonderful inversion of that here, where you've got this family that are bringing their own kind of, to coin a phrase, rustic dysfunction into the city, and they're actually destroying the kind of the city around them. They're destroying the place around them, with this baggage that they're bringing from the country. Because again, this is very much the inversion of what you typically hear, in American culture, right? The idea is that the country is the pure and wholesome place, and the city is the wicked corrupter. And I think why we were both thinking of this joke from The Big Lebowski is, by this time it's already kind of a joke. The joke being here that Bunny Lebowski, who we first meet, is played by Tara Reid, and she's getting her toenails painted, and she's sitting in a modernist like Richard Neutra house in Los Angeles, and just like living a life of pure indulgence. The idea that she would look at this like horrible setting and be like, oh yeah, I'm so nostalgic for the south side of Moorhead, Minnesota. The old family farm seemed to be kind of what was going on, with the Milkman a little bit. The fact that you've got this inversion.
Right. And like for me, one thing I think about a lot is like that experience of rural and city, and like the kind of pastoral idea of the rural landscape that's not really accurate. I mean, if you've grew up in or lived in or spent time out in the country, it can be quite frightening and grim and confusing and intense. And so I'm always more interested in that type of story, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Another movie that it reminded me of was by Charles Burnett, a wonderful movie from the early 90s called To Sleep with Anger. And it's about a middle-class family in Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles, and their country cousin, who's played by Danny Glover, comes to visit. And, he's bringing with him all his kind of rough and rowdy and mystical and, strange country ways. And he sort of undermines the family. He sort of brings the family down from the inside. And you get the sense that everything he represents is all the stuff that the family thought that they were getting away from, when they left the rural South. And so there's an element of that in the Milkman, I think, where, we'll talk a little bit about the setting of Oak Lake Park, and kind of where that sits culturally. But yeah, I think there's this idea of bringing rural dysfunction and darkness into the city and kind of, destroying it from the inside.
Yeah, and the city as like a corrupting place. Like it's such a 20th century story, like rural family moving to the city, and the family line splits for all sorts of different reasons. I'm super compelled by that.
This is another piece that came up in my conversation with Nick, but this is a painting from 1890 that's in Philadelphia by Thomas Hovenden, who was born in Ireland, came to the United States, and died in 1895, a little bit after this. But apparently this painting was shown at the 1893 Columbian Exposition and was said to be the most popular painting. Because again, I think this is a story that a lot of families were starting to go through at this time. The idea that, the country is over. There's no opportunity. There's nothing to do. So we have to send our children into, the maw of the city to, be ground into dust, by the machine of
Right.
urban capitalism. But also, it's the one hope for the family to experience any kind of, non-precarity economically.
And it's totally enduring. Norman Rockwell redid this painting in the 50s, I think. And it was like a working class dad and a college boy, like his college son going off to school, right? It's like, it is enduring as a story or a myth, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the story that was coming down for me. I was thinking when I was talking to Nick, I think the last ancestor relative of mine to work on a farm was my great-grandparents' generation. Because the story that we always told, the operative phrase in our family was tire tracks, that my grandmother made tire tracks out of Decatur Township, Ohio, as soon as she turned 18, so she could go into Cincinnati and get her, get her beautician's license and kind of leave the country behind. And so I think, right about this time, 1890 is when this myth is kind of at its peak. And if we think of this painting in the context of the Milkman, like the father would roughly be, about this age, right? I mean, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a generation behind, but, this is, you kind of wonder if this kid is like really excited to get away from all this stuff, because this is like a suffocating environment here.
Right. The web, right? Like the web is always used as a metaphor of good things, like being caught in a web of relationships. But I think it can also be a little more ambivalent than that. It's not always good necessarily.
And I think that's what Minneapolis represented to a lot of rural Minnesota and a lot of, rural folks, in the surrounding states. It represented this exciting, bustling place where you could make money, you could make relationships, you could kind of recreate yourself. But, again, in the Milkman, that the stuff you're fleeing is never like far behind.
This would be good time to go to the next slide, maybe?
I think it would, yeah.
Here, I got it. So this is a photo from the Hennepin County Library. This is Oak Lake Park. This is the neighborhood that my great-grandparents moved to when they came from the UP. I'm pretty certain the house on the right was their house. And I think that little boy down there, I'm guessing he's a playmate of one of my grandparents or my grandpa, but I don't really know. This neighborhood was so interesting to look at. It's all these big, beautiful Victorian houses that kind of were in their second life by the time my family moved there. Everything was owned by landlords now, and everyone rented, and they were boarding houses. They weren't owned by homeowners. So some of them had sort of been chopped up. They were divided into multiple units, but clearly so beautiful. And I mean, I can imagine how exciting it would be for someone from the country to move here.
Yeah, when I first moved to Minneapolis, somebody that I wish I could remember who they were because it's one of those profound things that stuck with me, mentioned that if you start in downtown Minneapolis and you're going outward, basically for every 10 blocks or so, you're going ahead about 5 or 10 years, because it's the development starts in the core, and initially it's the immediate area around downtown is where the wealthy, where the wealth is, and then it goes a little further south, and of course here we are, like, in this neighborhood, you can see, around us all the mansions, and then the wealth keeps going further and further and further out, until you get to Richfield and Bloomington and the suburbs, or but Oak Lake Park was like that. It was started in the 1870s, and very intentionally built with kind of winding roads and this very sylvan kind of setting, and these beautiful right, yeah, sylvan, yeah, these beautiful Victorian houses that the wealthy could live in, right on Brackett Creek, which is industrialization continued, started to get like dirty.
You mean Bassett's Creek?
Bassett's Creek.
Bassett's
Sorry,
Creek,
not Brackett
yeah.
Creek. Yeah, Bassett Creek. As industry continued and as the 19th century continued, got more and more polluted and dirty and less desirable. And so all these houses were, again, you see a lot of this in Whittier too, were broken up into boarding houses and single resident occupancy places and those kinds of things. And there was a journalist named Harrison Salisbury who grew up in Minneapolis, and he had lived in the Oak Lake Park area about the same time as Nik's relations. And he wrote about it in retrospect. To my playmates and their families, Oak Lake was a land beyond dreams. They'd never seen anything like Victorian houses, the lawns, the curving streets, the sidewalks and the elms in Bialystok or Pinsk. In their villages, they lived in izbas of mud and reeds and thatched roofs and clay floors. Now they occupied 3,000 square feet in a mansion, bigger than the landlord's house. If your house backed up on the railroad yards, was anything more exciting?
It's so good.
Yeah, because you can imagine that, because obviously a lot of the folks that were coming in about this time were, refugees, immigrants from Eastern Europe, that were fleeing extremely barren and troubled landscapes, to live here. And you can imagine that, if you were coming from, rural North Dakota or Michigan, and you're coming to this place, that seems like a huge step up.
I was thinking about why I'm so interested in the history of this house. And I feel like houses are kind of like plot points for families.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You really center your memories about an era in your family's life, by a house. And so this neighborhood was demolished in 1930, 1931.
Yeah, it's some of the first of the so-called urban renewal.
Right.
And, again, at this time, from a progressive standpoint, you would argue, well, yeah, this is substandard housing. It's right on what's basically by this point an open sewer. Best to just level it, start over. Again, that kind of like that punishing of memory that comes up so often in American life, right? That, okay, let's just burn it all down, start over, not think about it, kind of move on to the next thing.
So in my mind, like the Oak Lake Park house was the house I was trying to imagine in The Milkman. And at the very end of the film, there is a part where it's after the credits, and you hear this voice on the phone, and the house rips apart and starts to collapse. So I realize now, like maybe, like I'm afraid people are looking at it as a metaphor for the family falling apart. And I was like, oh man, that's like too easy.
Doesn't it actually say that on the didactics outside the
It could.
exhibition?
For me, I'm thinking of.
So, you
like,
can see where people might have gotten the idea.
For me, it's about the house being destroyed. Like it's about the bulldozing of Oak Lake Park in my mind, like urban renewal and your neighborhood being bulldozed, coinciding with your family just falling apart for other reasons.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said something when we were talking about this really poignant, and I don't know how much of the family history you want to get into here, but yeah, I mean, the destruction of Oak Lake Park lined up with, basically that part of your family falling apart.
Right.
Are you comfortable?
Sure. Yeah,
speaking
totally.
To
Yeah, it's a totally mysterious and kind of intense story, but my great-grandpa killed my great-grandma by pushing her down a flight of stairs. And then maybe, we don't know. Thank you, Anna. We don't know. My grandpa got a phone call when he was at camp saying, you need to come back home. His younger siblings were sent to different orphanages, and he kind of made his way trying to bring the family back together, and it never really worked. It was such a big turning point and so dramatic, and lined up with the neighborhood being bulldozed. To me, it's so spooky and dramatic and almost mythical or something.
Yeah, I mean, the place feels haunted, by that. And with the specifics of the house, I mean, obviously there's this idea of the thrift store art, where you're kind of beholden to whatever it is you find. This would be a good opportunity to talk about the ditch in Grigla, which is, I think, one of my favorite parts of this.
So the photo on the wall that the dad is sentimental about during the wood carving scene is a photo of a ditch in Grigla, Minnesota.
Ditch number 11.
Ditch number
So
11.
It's the one where they finally got the ditch digging perfected.
It was from the Beltrami County Historical Society. And to me, it's like a WPA era photograph maybe, and the cutover is so grim and intense. And to me, like this represents like maybe where the family came from, maybe like the rural roots or something. And the cryptic thing the dad says, a lot of things in your life are the way they are because of this ditch. It's so profound and also so like, what? What, Dad?
Yeah, it's like the classic dad thing where it's like inviting, but it's also like forbidding. It's like, I'll tell you a little bit about this. And, I think when I'm trying to explain things to my son, I can see where I'm glossing over certain aspects. Right. But yeah, I mean, it's just such a grim, image. It's.
And like, I think there's this, I'm hesitant to like invoke like Southern Gothic literature. I think I don't think it describes exactly what I'm interested in, but I think there's just a dearth of like rural, like representing the rural in art in a way that isn't pastoral.
Yeah.
Like there's just not a lot out there that shows rural life as a complex experience. And so to me, that picture kind of summed that up in my mind. For some reason.
No, it does. And it kind of sounds like I've been ragging on the country throughout my time up here. But yeah, I mean, there is this real ambiguity about it. I mean, I know that, I don't know. My spouse, for example, grew up in a rural setting. And, sometimes some of my professional development work takes me to places where, I'm talking to people that live in rural areas and they speak very eloquently about it. And, I go home to my spouse and I'm like, have you ever thought about moving back to Fillmore County? She has no interest in that at all. I think just because there can be an aspect of like, I
think this is a perfect time for our final slide.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Our final category, which we call, what did we call it? Fact, Fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, fiction and nonfiction. That was the one where we couldn't come up with a real like punchy title, so we just kind of said the thing that it is. But I hear obviously this doesn't have anything directly to do with the work, but it has a lot to do with the ideas that we're talking about. So Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, and this is in your hometown.
Bemidji.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my hometown.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the thing about Paul Bunyan, and this is probably well known to a lot of people here, but it's not that old an idea. It's one of these things that you get the sense has been passed down for generation upon generation. But the earliest print reference to Paul Bunyan is from about the same time as the Cunning Home Ties painting, 1893. And so you can imagine that it was probably in circulation a little bit before that, but probably not a long time before. So yeah, I mean, there's this idea that it is this idea that feels ancient and mythological and almost geological in scale, but it's
But
not.
he's like the Michelin Man.
Yeah,
like
it's
he was
essentially-
made to sell lumber.
Sell stuff. Yeah, exactly. Most if you come across a mythical figure in American life that's over about 6 or 7 feet, they're probably created to sell you stuff, really. So I think he falls in that tradition really nicely. But yeah, I mean, there's this idea that the reason I asked about why if you were hesitant to kind of share the specifics of your family is you're not interested in making a documentary about your family's trauma.
Right. Like, coming from the documentary tradition, like I'm always interested in artwork that like gets at the edge of documentary form or like roots out some contradiction in documentary photography or documentary films. But, this work kind of became fiction. You know what I mean? Like there's this way in which we think fiction writers make things up, but they really don't. Like everything comes from something. You are like as an artist, you're a filter that filters the outside world through your medium. And so for me, like the stories stopped being directly linked to my family, I guess. It was more like maybe an ecstatic truth type thing, like it's about getting at something you can't get at using pure documentary means. It's more about myth or something like that.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of creating a framework that feels true, even if the specifics aren't true. I mean, that's what I love about the fact that it's called Winter Street, because again, that's a very, kind of almost tossed off seeming name. But the area around Minneapolis where, Oak Lake Park was located, there's a lot of streets around there that don't exist anymore. But if you know the history of kind of Minneapolis street naming conventions, right? And who among us has not spent many hours looking into the history of conventions of Minneapolis street naming? But the idea was that, there was initially a kind of a completely disordered jumble of street names. There was like 3 grape streets that were so named because there was probably some grapes nearby. And so in the 1870s, the city went in and said, okay, we're just going to reset the entire thing. If it goes north-south, it's an avenue, and it's numbered. If it goes east-west, it's a street, and it's numbered. And if there's any of these weird little clusters, we're just going to give them, like, thematically similar kinds of names, president streets. And so the idea that there's a Winter Street like feels exactly like that kind of anal retentive, like civic kind of Minneapolis thing where it's like, okay, this is Winter Street, this is Summer Street, this is Spring Street, this is Fall Street, right? I think one of the other streets in that area was the Great Lake Streets. Okay, it's Ontario Street, it's Erie Street, it's Superior Street. So the idea of Winter Street feels very like, oh, okay, that's part of like this orderly, understandable system that is why people like to live in cities, right? Things are orderly, things make sense. There's an underlying infrastructure and services that keep things flowing and humming, and we can just live our lives and not have to worry about.
I think there is a Winter
ditches.
Street in both St. Paul and Minneapolis.
I think there's one in Northeast, right? Because there's a Spring Street too.
Yeah, it's a short little thing.
Yeah, a short little
street.
thing. But there could be multiple Winter Streets.
Right. Like to me, it's like it's like world building, right? Like the Milkman has just been an exercise in building an imaginary world to kind of spend time in. And for some reason, Winter Street fits so perfectly. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's like an exterior world and it's an interior world too. And I think the exterior world is really interesting because there are a lot of clues throughout. I think you've got the grain silos.
Clues, yeah.
Clues, yes. Clue Street, right down Clue Street. Yeah, the grain silos kind of do give it that very, I think you were saying that you were thinking of like Snelling Avenue in Minneapolis,
Yes.
South Minneapolis, as it's kind of a potential.
Right. Like I like Snelling Avenue in Minneapolis because there's a major road in St. Paul called Snelling. But this minor Snelling is so funny to me. It's like a weird doubling or something, like a weird inversion. Maybe.
Yeah. And I live pretty close to Snelling, and, when I'm doing like not family genealogy, house genealogy, right? I don't know my family genealogy because my family won't talk about it. But so I can look at the people that lived in my house. And, most of them worked for the railroad and lived, and worked in all the grain silos that are up and down Snelling. And that to me has always been a great like visual shorthand for urban Minneapolis. You can imagine, imagine going to these huge, like towering multi-story
Like castles or
castles
something.
almost. Yeah. I mean, castles where you could fall in a vat of flour and suffocate, but castles nonetheless.
So yeah, at the very end of the film is this genealogist's voice. Part of my research was I did this road trip around Lake Michigan, trying to learn about my family's experience in the UP and maybe where my great grandpa might have gone after he left the family. And I had this voicemail on my phone from a woman I met in like a little town up near Escanaba. It was this type of day when you go to the historical society and they say, oh, you need to talk to old so-and-so. He's mowing the lawn of the baseball field. And you find him and he's like, oh, you have to talk to my sister. She's busy today. Come back tomorrow. And like you go on this chain of this string to find somebody who might know something. And this woman left me a message on my phone about this lumber mill that my great grandpa might have worked at. And so the film ends with this voicemail. And she's kind of going on and on and on. The film shifts from day to night, even as she just keeps going and explaining how to get this like detail from Ancestry.com. She can't like get it off the computer to me. And so I don't know why I like that as an ending. Like to me, it like is totally futile. And yet maybe that's like the whole point of it is like part of the journey maybe is like as important as the outcome, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this very 21st century idea, I think, and especially a very internet-y idea, and even more specifically an Ancestry.com-y idea, where, you can take like the messiness of the past and you can impose this order and rationality, and like these things are understandable, these things that your father and grandfather hid from you, you can learn the truth, you can figure it out, and you can finally be whole again. Of course, like that is never the case. And this is being recorded. So Mom, if you're watching this, I want you to fast forward about 5 minutes or so. But it's like, I think a lot of people have this story. We have the story in my family. My mom's grandmother, right? The person that she grew up with, a grandmother who had been an orphan from Ireland, and had come to the United States as a child and had worked as a nurse and, had this whole life. We find out that apparently she was not born in Ireland. She had a kid as a teenager, a daughter, and then adopted that daughter's identity, left the daughter with her parents, and carried this identity with her and lived the rest of her life. So she had this whole kind of secret life that nobody knew about. Was my mom excited to learn this new truth about her beloved grandmother? She was not. Like, she was getting in arguments with these people that she, met online. Like, not serious arguments, but it's just like, it's this very destabilizing thing. And so I love the fact that this ends with that kind of like amateur genealogist rambling sort of, voicemail that I've heard some of these, this idea that this darkness, this disorderly past can be, kind of neatly packaged again and put into a coherent and understandable system that you can understand.
Right, but you can't. It's totally futile.
No, it makes a huge mess. I mean, it's like, yeah.
I think we are kind of at time right now. We are not having an official Q&A.
No,
we have 10 minutes?
We are having an official Q&A.
Oh.
But it's like in
the gallery.
It's in the gallery. It's kind of a bifurcated system that we have here. This is where we talk at you. And then
but I think that kind of covers everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think
say.
that covers a lot of it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, any good tips on sourcing this kind of,
sourcing dollhouses?
Sourcing dollhouses
on Facebook Marketplace.
Exactly. Because I mean, that is really like one of those subcultures I imagine you can go real deep into.
I think there's a lot of dollhouses in the Midwest because people have long winters, and it's fun because it's like a feminized art form. Yeah. The dollhouse, like it's always women who do dollhouses and men who do model trains, which I don't know why it is that way. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know. As a person who spent many of the last couple winters at the Model Train Museum in St. Paul, there's such a delicate distinction between model trains and dollhouses.
Right.
I mean, it's basically the same. Yeah,
scale is different.
A scale question.
That's
Do you know
important.
anything about the provenance of the dollhouse?
It's actually printed on a piece of paper glued into one of the rooms. There's a little note that came on the bottom of the dollhouse that I stuck in the room that was typewritten by the guy who made it and who he made it for, and a few electrical instructions, also the voltage and that kind of thing. So
those are important details.
They are, yeah. I think we can wrap it up. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. I'll be in the gallery hanging out. Andy might stay for a little bit. Love to see you guys in the gallery, right down the hall. US Bank Gallery, yes, that's what it's called.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you guys.